So, feeling our emotions, and in particular, right now, sadness, and continuing to work with the Tao of Fully Feeling by Pete Walker and his beautiful work around complex PTSD and how we can really come back to functioning fully as an adult through some of this recovery work that we do. He's a big believer in grieving and angering. And next week, we're going to focus more on the anger side of things. And that grieving is one of the ways that we are able to and release pent up emotions and also to really fully be engaged as a human being. And I know that with what happened last week with the murders in Buffalo, and then with the school shooting and all those children and teachers losing their life in Texas this week, it's a really heavy environment that we live in. And sometimes the grief part of it feels very accessible. And sometimes it just feels overwhelming. And we have a lot of different ways that we work with that. And one of the ways that we work with that is we really come into an understanding of what it is that's going on. And also, we do, some trauma education and some kind of cognitive mind things. And then we also do some things that really help us to feel it in our bodies and to work with it in a kind, compassionate, humane way with ourselves as well as with others. One of the points that he makes is to do with our culture of we're not really raised in a culture that knows how to feel, especially sadness. There's a lot of anger that gets expressed, but feeling a range of human emotions is not something we're highly trained in or encouraged to do. And that life doesn't have to be pain-free to be fully enjoyed. We can actually move right in and move towards our feelings and feel them, and that's actually a good thing. And many of us who have been doing this work for a while know that in our own experience as well. So much of our unnecessary emotional pain comes from this being stuck. So I wanted to start right off here with an inquiry. So the first part of that is, what was your experience as a child when you felt like sad crying? So there's all kinds of crying. There's frustrated crying and crying for someone else, or there's a lot of different kind of impulses for crying. But when you were feeling sad, and maybe there was a loss, maybe there was, something small and usual, like just feeling alone, or maybe it was something bigger, like something specific happened. But what was your experience, and were you as a child allowed to cry? Did you get sympathy when you cried? Did you get someone to kind of comfort you? Or did you get told to buck it up? What was your experience? So let's take a moment for that. Because this process that we do is a mindful, somatic, in our body process. Notice in your body how you feel as you're thinking back. And this reverse inquiry gets to the unconscious, the resistance that we don't always know is here. When you say something like, I can afford to feel sad, it's not as an affirmation. It's really to elicit if there's a no. Let's sit with that for a bit. I can afford to feel sad. So, regardless of what your situation was as a child, what is it now? Now, as an adult, whatever age that you are, when you say to yourself, this is okay, I can afford to feel sad, I can afford to cry. And notice your response. And sometimes the response comes in the form of thoughts in the mind. And more often, it comes in the form of some kind of tightness or contraction in our body. And that might be followed with thoughts. Some of it might be inner critic. Don't be a sad sack, things that we've heard as a child. Nobody likes to hang around with someone who's sad all the time. You could also go into what is the worst thing that would happen if you were to allow yourself to feel sadness and to cry? Stay present in your body. Notice what's happening. Notice your breath, especially if you start to hold your breath. Notice that. Let your breath get a bit more ease. What is the worst thing that would happen if today, later, maybe, not this moment, although it could be this moment, but what would be the worst thing that would happen if you could allow that feeling of sadness and you started to cry? And then take a few deep breaths and notice, just kind of run through the things that came forward. What did you notice around that? What part of that reluctance comes from your past, from your childhood? Are the things that feel difficult about crying now, are they true? Or are they things that are more from your childhood? Maybe you were shamed for being sad, or maybe you just were not comforted. And is there a sense that you could comfort yourself now? One of the ways that we comfort ourselves is we take off. We go into other things, whether it's some kind of an addiction. We might go into a fight response. We get really busy. There's a lot of ways that we minimize the way we feel. And sometimes this is because we don't know what to do with the feelings. Whenever we start to feel something like grief or sadness, we don't know what to do with it. So it feels shameful, maybe, that we get embarrassed. It feels like we're too vulnerable. That can often be at the root of that. So in our heads we might know, and I'm sure in our experience too to some extent, we know that when we digest these feelings and we let them be felt, that we feel better afterwards. This peace and contentment underlies the expression of our feelings. Once we get that out, then we're not putting all our energy into resisting it or managing it. Let's go back into this inquiry. So, when you feel sad and feel like crying now, what is your usual response? It could be a numbing, some kind of a fight response. And whichever of these questions feel like there's something you want to work with for a moment. Does it embarrass you to cry? And in what situations and with who? Are there some people that you're really comfortable crying with? Are you always comfortable expressing yourself through tears, or is it that you never are? And let's stay with that for a minute, noticing your body, keeping yourself regulated with your breath. If you feel like you're getting dragged back into the past too much and you're kind of losing your awareness of the present and that you're doing this inquiry, you could open your eyes, look around the room, hold your own hands, do those grounding and orienting practices to bring yourself back. You could do some tapping on your forehead. We're just kind of looking into what's our usual experience with feeling sad and crying. And then when you do feel blocked somehow, you're numbed out or you're more mad than sad, and that you really want to kind of come into this, you sense that there's some grief here. What do you do to release the block and come into the feeling? There's a lot of different ways that we could do that. We could watch sad movies. I used to do that a lot when I worked at an AIDS organization in the 80s. And there wasn't any opportunity during the week to really stop and feel. So on Friday nights, I'd often watch a sad movie, and that would kind of get me moving emotionally, and then I could feel. So, what works for you? For some of us, it might be that we share that with a friend. We share how we're feeling. Or you might write about it. There really are no right or wrong answers to this. There's just what we're observing about our pattern, and how might we work with that skillfully, more mindfully. And if numbing out and pushing it aside and not handling our feelings directly is part of it, that's normal. That's the way it is for all of us. And we don't want to push that away all the time. We all have a sense of it's important to feel. And how might we do that with kindness, with support? What are some of the ways that you work with this in your own life? And this last part is just a few things about crying from Pete Walker's book. This particular is from the Tao of Fully Feeling. And he talks about this in complex PTSD as well. Something that's very familiar to all of us is that we have these really contracted muscles in our throat and in our mouths from holding in tears. One of the strategies then we could have perhaps is to do some sitting with those sensations. When it's a week like this and there's a lot of overwhelm, especially around the grief, perhaps one of the ways in could be to give ourselves some time And then to really work on relaxing, relax the hinges of your jaw so that you're not clenching your teeth. Relax your tongue, your throat, your chest. And then to normalize that sometimes when we cry, we shudder, we tremble. Sometimes we're keening or wailing. And that this is something we could allow ourselves to do. We don't have to hold ourselves so tightly around this. Another element of this, I think, for me as an adult is to really feel sad for my inner child or my younger self. As I'm thinking back to times in my childhood when I felt so alone and no comfort and so much pain, I can be with that now. I can be with that younger self now in a way that nobody was then. And I have that kind of natural instinct to remother her and to give her that unconditional love. So we could imagine that. And we're not going to do that right now. It might be something that you could do later. But it's really important to set aside time for that. And I have some guided practices on Insight Timer and YouTube that will help with that too. Really nurturing our younger self. As we release the tears and we feel them and we let them go, then we can come into contact with some of the wonderful things as well.